Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Green. I'm an oblate of the World Community for Christian Meditation. I've also written quite a lot about mental health and well-being, which is the field that I worked in, and its relationship to meditation. Now, the other day I was invited to give a public talk entitled Meditation, A Path to Wellbeing and More. And this talk was to be at a small library in a small village called Earls Barton in Northamptonshire in England in the UK, just up here somewhere, which is, I'm speaking from Norwich in Norfolk in the UK. And maybe you can find yourself somewhere on that map of the world behind me. So, of course, the talk that I was going to give, which would have been kind of extemporized from notes, was cancelled, like everything else in the world, it seems. And so what I did was I quickly wrote out a talk on the theme of meditation as a path to well-being and more, and sent it to the organisers so that they could share it with people. So now I thought I would take the opportunity to share the talk more widely. Let's go globally. And so I'm going to read the talk. I'm going to deliver the talk to you, share it with you. But I'm going to read it as it was written for the good people, the good people of Earls Barton in Northamptonshire, a tiny village which I've never visited. But for the moment, that group of people that was going to be present in the library in Earls Barton in Northamptonshire is representative of the entire world community, just as every family, every household, every form of community is a reflection of the global human community. So I'm speaking to the people of Earls Barton, but also to all of you. So, the talk is Meditation, A Path to Wellbeing and More. Dear reader, well, dear viewer, I need to adapt that too. I wish you were not just a viewer, but also a member of the temporary community that we would have been if we'd been able to meet in the library at Earls Barton on March the 20th, 2020. Of course, we'd have only been apparently a temporary community, because once we have meditated together, we become a community of love. And there's nothing temporary about love. Just setting aside all judgments and anxieties, being together in stillness and silence, reminds us of who we are and who we are together. We discover that we've always been part of a community of love, just by virtue of being human. That's our deepest and most permanent identity. And the practice of meditation gently affirms that shared identity. So perhaps, as many others have wished or seen, perhaps the crisis that's now affecting all of humanity will also uncover more of our essential reality and teach us to live with ourselves and with others more wisely, more compassionately. Well, the situation that we find ourselves in dictates that one of the first pieces of advice about the path to well-being is, ironically enough, not to go to a talk about well-being. Anyway, that temporary wisdom, and this one really is temporary, has been made more than advisory now. It's been taken out of our well-washed, gel-rubbed hands. No more gatherings for the foreseeable future, and not much of the future is foreseeable at this moment, which leaves us little option but to be anywhere but in the moment. And that, as you may be aware, even if you've never meditated before, is the main invitation of this practice, to be in the moment. Even that, though, can become just a reassuring idea, and it grows less comforting as it turns into an all too familiar cliche, which you hear repeated too often, perhaps. Just be in the moment. It wears thin in some way. But meditation itself can rescue us from that trap of cliche and grooved habit, that trap. So on one level, every time we sit down to meditate, we're preparing to make our reality in some way, perhaps in every way, unfamiliar. We detach from the habitually comfortable so that we can release ourselves once more into our true home, our shared identity, beyond thought, images, and stories. Perhaps the very unfamiliarity of the COVID world, the COVID-19 world that we're now inhabiting, will paradoxically also help to sharpen our sense of where that true home lies and always has done. We might just find ourselves able to go beyond the familiar idea of being in the moment and enter the astonishing experience of being the moment. A meditation is not complicated. It's simple and simplifying. That essentially is why it's not just the path, but the royal road to well-being. We also find, as we start to follow it, that it's a narrow way, this royal road, with a narrow gate. It has to be, because in order to be well, which is what well-being is about, and I think of that as meaning the same as to be real. In order to be well, to be real, we have to let go of a lot of our baggage. And most of our baggage is made up not of material possessions and obsessions, though God knows we have far too many of those, all of us. But most of our baggage is made up of ideas about ourselves. And these, it turns out, are our very favourite possessions, the ones that we have the most trouble letting go of. And it's this letting go that the practice of meditation helps us to train for. We think of it as exercise, as a training. And what a relief and a release it is when we find ourselves beginning to lay down our burdens of self-criticism, envy, competition, anxiety, obsessive thought, and all the other internal noise that gets in the way of us and being well. Well, maybe we should spend a bit of time reflecting on what we mean by well-being, that word. It's far from being a new word, but it did gain a new lease of life and a fresh charge of meaning when the newly founded World Health Organization, WHO, we hear a lot from them, thankfully. Well, not thankful that they need to, but thank God they're there. They declared when they were set up in 1948 that health wasn't just the absence of disease and infirmity, but was, I quote, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Now, that's always struck me as a definition which is wildly ambitious. Which of us could claim to be healthy in those terms? Have you ever met or been someone who's achieved that happy state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being? If it does describe you, by the way, I wish you'd been able to come to Earl's Barton. I would have loved to have met you. But I kind of suspect that there's not many of us have that completeness about our health and well-being. But besides complete, I think I'd want to question health or well-being defined as a state. In my experience, and meditation is a practice that helps us to inquire into this, to explore it, well-being is much more an orientation than a state, an opening of possibilities, a potential for reframing and renewal, rather than simply a state. And I find myself wanting to put it as simply as possible. The fundamental nature of our well-being is the opposite of being stuck, the opposite of being stuck. To move, not just physically, to move is an expression of our freedom, and to be free is to be well. So our well-being is not a state, I would say, but a process, an unfolding. So well-being, along with its close cousin, wellness, really started to take off in the developed world, so-called. You can identify parts of it back there, if you like. From the mid-70s onwards, it became something to be aspired to, and inevitably something that people wanted to sell to us. The well-being industry came into, well, being. The images that accompanied it, and still largely do, often seem to feature people of improbable slimness, with impossibly wide smiles, wearing elegantly effortless sports and leisure wear, laughing together while the sun shines. They've de-stressed, they're relaxed, they're happy. So they may in fact be those rare but often photographed people who are completely physically, socially, and mentally well. Well, perhaps I'm being unfair to the well-being industry here. However, I think that the truth that we all know from our step-by-step experience, day to day, of our own journeys, is that those kind of images of well-being, those smiley, shiny ones, are at best partial and at worst unhelpful. Profoundly unhelpful, I would say, because they can tend to make us think and feel something like this. Oh, there's another thing that I can't achieve or be like other people can. And so our well-being feels even further away, like some barely remembered lost property. Gone. So what's the possession of well-being supposed to do for us? What's the promise at its crudest? Well, it seems to offer us protection against suffering, unhappiness, and whatever's the opposite of well-being, maybe unwellness, because we all continue to harbour pockets of magical thinking. Wouldn't it be wonderful if something or somebody could take away this pain, this misery, this limitation? Then I'd have my well-being back, and all would be well. But our wisdom, which is much more who we are than magic is, our wisdom knows that really that's not how it works. And we might know this, we might come to know this, once we've chased after and tried out all kinds of magic bullets to win back our well-being and protect us from suffering. And some of them will have been more effective than others. At random, I chose some well-being strategies here, so I hope I'm not treading on too many toes. Kinesiology, psychotherapy, yoga, rapid eye movement desensitization, running, turmeric, nasal irrigation, religion, St. John's wort, and so on. Now, I plucked them out of the air, but actually looking at them, I think I've probably tried all of those. And some are indeed more useful than others. You have to find out for yourselves. But we're forced to admit, whatever we try, and some of that is stupendously helpful and vital. But whatever we do try, well-being as a state, a fixed condition, remains, of course, forever fugitive, just out of our grasp. We may have even come to meditation as a way to recapture our well-being. It will disappoint us, like everything else, like the nasal irrigation and the turmeric, if that remains the agenda to recapture well-being. Because just as well-being is not a state, it's also not, neither is it a property. It's not something that we can possess. But what meditation will do is to support us as we continue to live out, now as honestly as possible, to be hoped, with all magical thinking gone, the central question of human life. Is it possible to know well-being and to enjoy well-being in the midst of the inevitable pain, unhappiness, and dissatisfactions of existence? Well, my simple answer to that is yes. Yes. And meditation is a way in which we can find that out for ourselves. You can find that out for yourselves, perhaps, within our own experience, within your own experience. It's a practice that enables us to open to as much reality as we are capable of doing, no longer dividing the world and ourselves, it should be said, into what's acceptable, shiny, smiley, happy, and what isn't, suffering, in pain, depressed, anxious. Which leads us to an even simpler account of what well-being is. The capacity to be as real as possible. That's, if I'm forced for a definition of well-being, it's the capacity available to us to be as real as possible. To have life, and life in all its fullness. Maybe take a break there, have a stretch, meditate if you have a practice already. Have your daily permitted outdoor exercise and come back to the rest of the talk.